And welcome back to News On. As we just discussed with our very own Heather Mullins, in an effort to be woke, the Major League Baseball has now moved its All-Star game and draft from 51% what seems to be black Atlanta, Georgia, to 76% white Denver, Colorado. This, of course, is to show opposition to Georgia's new voter ID laws. Joining us live now to weigh in on this and so much more is former chairwoman of the Massachusetts Republican Party, Jennifer Nassar, and attorney and Democratic strategist Kelly Hyman. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's nice to see you.
So, Kelly, I want to start with you. Just overall, do you think this decision makes sense for the MLB?
Absolutely. I think it definitely makes sense. I mean, they're speaking out against the voter restrictions, voter suppression in Georgia.
Jennifer, how does moving, and again, we brought this up with Heather Mullins, you're talking about a vast difference here between the black population versus the white population, which is where, Kelly, you actually are in Denver, Colorado, where the MLB is going to go from now on. Does this decision make sense to move to essentially a more white location?
No, it doesn't. And what I find curious here is why no one decided, none of these CEOs in Major League Baseball, no one decided to take a breath and actually read the law. What they did was they just jumped to conclusions, and they moved it from a predominantly black city to a predominantly white city. And in the meantime, who are they hurting? They're hurting the people who are working. They're hurting the small businesses. They're hurting the people who work at those small businesses who need the income. And so now the money was stripped out of Atlanta and it was brought up to Denver, Colorado. I think that's worse than taking a stand, because they can take a stand in many different ways, and this didn't have to be it.
Kelly, I want you to weigh on that, but also I want to talk about also when it comes to voter ID news. Many are also criticizing companies like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines for coming out and swinging opposition of Georgia's new voter ID laws due to the fact that those companies themselves require voter IDs to use their services. So if you can't fly Delta without identification, and according to reports, Coca-Cola required a valid photo ID for admission to its annual shareholders meeting last year, how can you justify this move, Kelly? Some people are saying, hey, that sounds a little bit hypocritical. Is it not?
No, I don't think so at all. We have to look at the issue as well. We have to think about people's access to the ballot. We live in a democracy. We live in a great country, but we should make sure that people, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, have access to the polls. That's what makes our country great, and we shouldn't try and suppress people's votes or make it so difficult for them so that they're unable to vote.
But Kelly, let me go back to this point too. Again, we've talked about numerous studies that have said the minority community, more so than any other community, has been especially hit hard because of the pandemic. You're moving out of Atlanta, Georgia, going back to the point that you're making earlier, Jennifer. Is this not hurting just average everyday people more so than it's actually hurting the governor of the state? You're punishing citizens that have already, frankly, been hit pretty hard because of this pandemic.
Right, and that's what I think is not being looked at here, is that there's no consideration for the actual people who are impacted. I mean, look, the governor is one person, and the way that you vote for him or vote against him is on election day. And that's the wonderful thing about the democracy. But what these CEOs are doing has nothing to do with democracy. It has to do with wielding power, and it has to do with the lobbyists and the pressure that they are getting from various groups. Now, on the voter ID thing, Georgia actually is including making it easier to have an ID to go and vote. It is to vote. It is not asking for a driver's license. And I think there are about 70% of the people who agree with having voter ID. And the voter ID has to do with absentee ballots to ensure ballot integrity. And so if we're trying to make the system better and cleaner, it's not trying to make it more difficult. I don't think there's anyone who is in favor of making voting more difficult. As a matter of fact, most of us want it to be easier for people to go and vote and express themselves. And so when you have to have a valid ID to get on a plane, when you have to have a valid ID to get your tickets to that Major League Baseball game from a will call office, then I don't see what the difference is when you are going to vote.
So Kelly, let's use that argument real quickly there, going to this whole idea of voter suppression, because again, this is something I hear Democrats bring up time and time again. So then, is Delta Airlines suppressing minorities to fly if they require you to show ID?
Well, I think we're talking about different things. I mean, I think when we're talking about voting, and she makes a point about making it accessible, then if we want to make it accessible, then do what Colorado does, where they have it's a ballot state. I mean, let's make it accessible to people as well. But this is different, the airlines are private businesses and they can make certain requirements and stuff like that. But this is about allowing people access to our democracy, which is totally different.
Well, you speak of democracy, but some of these companies are doing business with China, and then at the same breath saying that they're being repressive. But just curious about your thoughts on that. But then going back, Jennifer, I do want to go back to you real quickly because I do want to go to what a viewer had to say. So now we mentioned earlier with Heather Mullins that a lot of Republicans are now saying, well, we need to boycott Coca-Cola. But then going to that point, if Coca-Cola has a lot of business is generated in the state of Atlanta, are you then again not punishing people in Atlanta, Georgia by punishing Coca-Cola?
Yeah, you are. When you're talking about the average citizen, the person who goes to work every single day, this isn't the CEOs. These CEOs should maybe give up their multi-million-dollar salaries and solve poverty and solve all the other issues that we have currently. Go to the border and take care of the children that are there. But instead, the CEOs fly around in their private jets and they talk about all of these woke comments because someone on their staff told them that this is the right thing to say. In the meantime, the only people being impacted are the small guys, the people who are out there waking up every morning and going to the plants and working. I would hate to see this impact them just as much as I would hate to see impact the small business owners around the All-Star games in Atlanta.
I do want to go to what a viewer had to say. We were kind of touching on this issue yesterday, and I thought this viewer, Sally, I thought she brought up a really good point, and I want to get both of you to react to it because that's something we always aim to do on this program, is to give our viewers a platform where they can share his or her opinion. So this is what Sally had to say. She says boycotting is not cancel culture. She says it's fine to boycott over a true situation. It shows your disapproval. Disapproval is fine. It is not fine, she says, to perpetuate lies and to use a boycott to promote an untruth. That's when a boycott might be on the edge of cancel culture. The Coca-Cola boycott of Georgia is wrong because it is based on an untruth, she says. There is no voter suppression in the Georgia voter law. Boycotting Coca-Cola in return is okay because you are objecting to the truthful actions of Coca-Cola. The latter is not cancel culture. Cancel culture is, again, cancellation of the truth. Kelly, your reaction.
Well, first, I do believe that the Georgia law is voter suppression. But, we live in a great country, and so if you don't like a certain corporation or a certain thing, you can boycott it. You can stop drinking a certain product. You could stop flying a certain particular airline, and that's ultimately your choice to do that based on the business and the business practice.
Jennifer, last word to you, 30 seconds.
I feel as though it's wrong on both ends because, number one, you have a CEO making a determination for his entire company that is unfounded and not true. And then on the other hand, you have people who this is their job, this is their livelihood. Why are we going to strip them of that? Because it's not their fault.
Well, so thank you, ladies, for responding to Sally. And Sally, if you're watching, thank you so much for sharing your voice with us. And for those who are watching who would still like to comment on this, you can do so. You can find me at Real Miranda Khan. We're going to ask our panel to stick around. We still have a lot more to get to. Coming up, Palm Beach Democrat mayor now coming to the defense of Republican Governor Ron DeSantis after allegedly misleading reports from CBS's 60 Minutes. We're going to ask the panel to stick around and weigh in on that. You're watching News On. We'll be right back.